Alrighty, hey gang, welcome back, you guys. Another episode of Stove Chat. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Episode 30 of Stove Chat. I'm Matt, as always, with Walker Stoves. As you guys know, I'm making plans for. I sell plans for rocket stoves and rocket cook stoves on my website, walkerstoves.com. So please go check it out. That's what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about building rocket stoves, and I'm always happy to help you guys build your dream stoves. So if you got questions, ask them here. If you need plans, go check out walkerstoves.com. There's my ad. There's my pitch. Hey everybody, nice to see you guys. Thanks for being here, everybody. Oregon Coast Green Man, first chat. Nice to see you, buddy. Been a while. Thanks for being around. Belgian Gulch, Mark. All right, Two Trance as well. Awesome. Dragon, hello. And Cletus. All right. Hey everybody. Thanks for being here, you guys. Really appreciate you guys hanging out with me for your Wednesday lunch break. Maybe it's not lunch where you are. But yeah, nice to see you guys. Hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. Hope you guys are having a great week. Tall Shadow, good to see you. Augustus, nice to see you, my friend. Welcome back. It's been a while. Oh, thanks for saying that. Last episode went well. It was thanks to everybody else. I just got to show pictures, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. Hey, Doug, nice to see you again, friend. All right, we got the whole gang here. So what do you know, you guys? Sunny again on a Wednesday in Washington. I keep thinking, no reason to cover my windows. How many more days of sun could we possibly have in Washington winter? But it always just happens that we get sun right now. Hey, Dan, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. Good morning. But yeah, so I got a little bright light coming in from the window again, but I think we got it pretty well lit now. It's not going to be too much of an issue, so great to see everybody. We got a good show today, you guys. I got some great questions from all of you, so many of you, and we got a couple builds we could look at if we have time, and yeah, we got stuff to do, so we should dive right into it. You know, first things first, and I don't know if this is a premature announcement. I didn't really ask, but Belgian Gulch, I see that you're here. And I just wanted to say, I wanted to comment on the successful pairing of Belgian Gulch with a customer who needed a secondary air tube. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've gotten a lot more questions from folks wondering, you know, what their best route is to get themselves secondary air tubes, doors, things like that, if they don't weld and don't really want to go too far down that path. And so our friend Belgian Gulch here has been slowly building an empire out there in Idaho of doors and secondary air pieces. And so I did send a customer his way. And Belgian Gulch, I'm just asking, is it okay for me to do that? I got your email, and I appreciate that. I should have corresponded more. You're probably getting used to my style now. But yeah, I just want to make sure that before we send the word out, but I've got other people that want that stuff, and so I just want to say, basically, here, we're sitting here. One of the first things I want to talk about is secondary air, and I wanted to let you guys know that we're starting to have some people out there, some craftsmen, that are making stuff that you guys can get your hands on if you don't want to make that stuff yourself. So, hey, Peace Train Farm, good to see you. Of course, I'm always happy to answer emails as best I can, Peace Train, so keep those questions coming. I love to interact with all of you folks building. It really... I mean, it brings me a lot of joy to get to be part of all these builds. So yeah, happy to help, man. And Belgian Gulch, awesome. We got a yes. So that's the official. That's not the official launch. We'll maybe do something a little more official down the road. But just so you know, we have a resource now for secondary air hardware, doors. If you need custom pieces, metalwork for your rocket mass heater, Belgian Gulch is the guy to get a hold of. You can email me. I'm sure you can get a hold of him, and we'll probably have some better contact information up at some point. But you can find him probably here through YouTube or over at Permies. I know that. And you could always email me, and I'll get you guys in touch. So there's that, and that brings me to the I'll start in on this next topic, and you guys, if you got any questions, just start throwing them in there, and we'll just try and get them out of the way in the first half of the show here if we can, or at least I'll just see them when they come up, probably ramble on as I do. So, first question today comes from Dan. Positive aspect. This is yours. I really wanted to talk about this on the show. It was a great question, and it was something I didn't go enough into when we looked at it. So Dan was asking about secondary air pieces, and he was, I could probably bring up the photo if I do a little. I should have done it beforehand. There was a photo that we looked at last week. I'm going to see if I can find it while I talk to you. There was a photo we looked at last week. And it was of a secondary air piece that had been put together where the vertical was simply fastened to the horizontal using a small tab. I don't know if this is the appropriate photo. No, it's not. And Dan's question was, is that appropriate? Can you just put that secondary air piece on there without welding? I'm not going to be able to find the photo, you guys, so I'm just going to come back to you because I'm going to get lost in my files there. But at any rate, so you got your horizontal piece like this on your secondary air and your vertical. And, ideally these are going to be welded together. But we saw a photo last week where there was just an L bracket here with screws fastening those two together. So this is sort of a loose connection in that case, and the L bracket's just keeping things in place. And Dan's question was, well, is that strong enough? And what about leaks all around the bottom? Is it okay that it's not hermetically sealed? And so I wanted to tackle kind of some of those questions about building secondary air. And then he goes on to ask, is the horizontal part going to deteriorate? Is the bottom part going to corrode? Do we only need to replace this part? Is this a good thing to just have it loosely attached with tabs so it can be easily replaced? And so, that those are great questions, and I get them a lot. And what I want to talk about is the fact that the secondary air piece can seem fairly daunting, but I want everyone here to understand that it doesn't need to be just exactly so. So, with that said, if you want one that's perfect, you can always contact Belgian Gulch, and I'm assuming he can even make you one out of the RA330, my preferred material, and get you a permanent welded one. A forever one. But there's a lot of ways you can do it without welding, and I wanted to talk about that. So first and foremost, the biggest question I want to tackle was, how important is it to have that thing airtight where the vertical, it's so hard to show you do this, where the vertical meets the horizontal? How important is that seal right down there, where this is going to be a round pipe going into a rectangular piece of tubing? And how crucial is that seal? And my answer is that it's not crucial at all. And the reason for that is that it's going to very quickly become completely plugged with ash. Okay? So the first little bit of a burn, you're going to get some air coming out of there. It's not going to kill your efficiency. It's coming into the firebox in the right place. It's just not quite as, the reason we want to bring it up high is simply because the air coming out of that secondary air tubing is cooler than the air in the firebox, so we're assuming that it's falling through the column of firebox gases and getting better mixing by coming in up high. So a little air coming in down low isn't going to hurt anything, but also that any air gaps you have down there are going to quickly, over just a couple fires, get a buildup of ash over them, and they're going to plug themselves. So what you don't want is big holes there, because then ash will go down in there and start to obstruct that secondary air. But you don't need to worry about it being hermetically sealed, because it will, like a lot of places in a rocket stove, things that aren't sealed are going to seal themselves for the most part. So, hey, Chris, welcome. Nice to see you from Telluride. I sure miss Telluride. What a great spot. And Tall Shadow says, speaking of secondary air, curious if the picture you have on your YouTube channel is a secondary air flame. I think that top, yeah, there's one that's secondary air, Tall Shadow, and there's another one that's just kind of, I had a window in the side of a batch box, and it was the flame path kind of, it was actually the primary coming in and blasting across the wood, if I remember correctly. There's some secondary there too, because it's original. I think they're old. I think they're original Peterburg, original batch box secondary air, which was at the top of the firebox. So anyways, I don't recall exactly, Tall Shadow, I'm sorry. But it's a side view into a batch box for sure. And yeah, there was one that was secondary air experiments from a top feed way back in an outside batch, if I remember correctly. Anyways, so going back to the secondary air conversation. So first and foremost, the seal doesn't really matter at the bottom. So that's first thing that's important. So with that said, there's a couple ways you can do this, put these things together without welding that are pretty simple. So the first one is L brackets. You can find like little 3/4 inch on the side picture frame L brackets, they're called usually, or corner supports, things like that. And if you just leave your lower section a little long so you can get an L bracket on the front and the back of that vertical, that's a totally adequate way to mount that thing. You could drill and tap, and you could just fasten those L brackets to both the vertical and the horizontal. And in that way, you'd also be able to remove and replace that vertical fairly easily when it does start to deteriorate if you're using black pipe or something that's not permanent like RA330. So that's one way you could pull that off. Another way you can do it is to let the vertical down into the horizontal, so you could oversize the hole where the vertical goes into the horizontal. And then when that vertical drops down in, you could just leave three little tabs as feet on it and remove the rest of the material that was up inside there so the air can get up into it, or some variation of that theme. And in that way, again, you could have a piece that's easy to remove and replace. Now, the one thing you want to remember is that vertical does want to protect the back of the firebox. So it wants to be durable from wood smashing into it. So you don't want it to just tip over if it's bonked. So if you do something with tabs on the bottom, sometimes it's good to kind of hammer the bottom pipe to pinch a little bit around the top and just get a little bit of a friction fit around that vertical. So there's a couple ideas on how you can do a secondary air piece without any welding. Now, there's other ways to achieve that as well, flanges and things like that. But I think those basic ways are really simple, and for most people, those are going to be adequate and get you through, get you burning. So there's the secondary air conversation, and those are the points I really wanted to make. I just wanted to talk about whether or not it needs to be sealed and the construction. And then one more thing about that, in terms of when you're fitting your secondary air, definitely in terms of the build process, leave that horizontal piece, leave its length undetermined until you have finalized your outer skin and your door location and everything else. Because what you'll find, and I made this mistake a few times, so this is just sort of me thinking back on how that process has gone. What you'll find is you'll build your core, and you'll sort of identify where you think your bricks or outer brick skin is going, and your door and all that. And if you cut your secondary air, you'll often find that things move a little bit for whatever reason, whether it's your door mounting, plan changed, your bricks, the stove grew a little bit, you put some features or details into it, various reasons, it just can change slightly, and so you could end up with your secondary air piece a little short if you cut it prematurely. So that's my suggestion there, is let that be one of the last pieces you put in the stove, and it'll probably work out better for you in the end. So there's that. That's the secondary air stuff. And let's see, anyone got any questions on that? That was a pretty straightforward presentation, but I do get a lot of questions on that. And one thing about that, actually I have another comment on secondary air. Secondary air in general, the whole, it's been changing over these last, it's been 10 years, and we've been slowly progressing. I think we're finally getting to a fairly settled point. And I have been remiss. I've tried to keep up with updating things, but I think that on my website there's still some old photos and stuff, and so people keep asking me, do I still put the slit in the secondary air? And I don't put the slit in the secondary air. And while the slit does improve efficiency just a tiny bit, it also increases the rate at which things deteriorate, because you just have so much more surface area getting exposed to the corrosive hot air, oxygen, carbon, environment. And so the slit ones tended to kind of deform and go away more quickly. This is when we're talking about black pipe. And I found that it wasn't very long where that slit, whatever advantage you were getting from it, didn't matter anymore because things had changed. So now I just use a little bit shorter, fully round piece of pipe, vertical, and ideally it's that RA330, so it's going to last a long time. Now you guys know that Peter Van den Bergh does put his little top piece on top of that secondary air, the Cobra he calls it, and I feel the same way about that as I do my slit, is that it does change the efficiency when it's there and when it's perfect, but in my opinion, the way I burn, it's not going to stay there very long. Now Peter, again, I just want to reiterate, his use is different. He's a one fire a day guy, and he even talked about how he was doing test burns in his workshop just the other day, and so he hadn't burned his big stove for like 3 days because he lives in basically a passive house. So while a secondary air piece of mild steel and his Cobra piece may hold up with that type of burn schedule for an appropriate, for an acceptable amount of time, I believe that in my stove, the way I use it with the ceramic fiber core and consecutive burns, that no metal inside there is going to work. And so it isn't really, in my opinion, it's not worth putting too much detail. This is my point. There's not much point in putting too much detail into the finish of your secondary air piece if you're making it with black steel or even stainless, because it will deteriorate and deform really quickly. If it's the RA330, by all means, build it the best you can, because it will hold up, in my opinion. So there's that. So, hey, Tom, nice to see you from Seattle. Thanks for being here. How large can a bell be? Is there a ratio of system size to bell size? That's a great question, Tom. It's one that there's a few different answers to, and there's quite a bit of information out there on the internet that talks about an ideal bell size for a certain rocket mass heater core size. And I just want to say that, in my opinion, most of the followers here know this. In my opinion, there really is a limit to how large a bell can be. Don't want to say there's no limit, but I would like to suggest that the range of bell size is much larger than what you might read in other places, and there's a really simple reason for that. The reason for that is if you build a rocket stove with no bypass for starting up when the bell is cold, then you must build the whole system such that the stove can start and generate enough draft, even with its bell, to draw, and keep that stove burning and not smoke back. So that's what limits a bell size, is how much load it's going to put on the stove in a typical startup situation, and whether you're going to start up and start pulling smoke out the house or start up and start blowing smoke into the house. If you don't have a bypass to put heat into the chimney, then the bell size will be limited. And how big? You can look at Donkey's board, rocket stove. I don't know what it is. It's called Donkey 32 on Pro Boards or Permies, and you'll find, or actually Peter's batchrocket.eu website is probably the best. You can find recommendations for bell sizes, but I throw those right out the window because I prefer to build with a bypass, not just because it lets me get away with a bigger bell, but because it allows me to start up with no issues in every conditions, regardless of what's going on outside or inside. So this is a long way of saying, Tom, that there is some limit to a bell, but in my opinion, it's not worth agonizing too much over. In my opinion, your best bet for planning and designing is fit the heater to your space, within reason, of course, and incorporate a bypass, and in that way, you can, you will have a broad range of what will work in terms of how big a bell can be. There's other considerations. How long do you want to burn versus how long do you want the heat cycle to be? The bigger the bell, the more mass, the longer it's going to take to heat it up, but the longer it will give heat off. So you got a lot of things to consider. But no, you're not really limited by any rules as long as you have a startup bypass. If you choose to not have a startup bypass, then I recommend you look at Peter Van den Bergh's batchrocket.eu website, and he will have some volume recommendations, and they go by internal surface area of the bell, because that's really what is extracting heat from those gases. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom, and I'm happy to elaborate more if you need. So Doug says, does the secondary air setup just anchor in the slot in the CFB? Does it ever tend to fall to the side? Great question, Doug. No, it doesn't. I've never had mine fall over. Yes, it just is set there on the, I mean, essentially it could just be set on the floor, but in the case of my builds, it is let into the CFB and or let into the fire bricks of the floor. And it's not, first of all, it's got a flat base. Like it's not, you've got a rectangular horizontal section, and usually the wood's sitting on top of that. So in order for it to roll over, it would have to flip that. But if you're asking about like the loose vertical and the horizontal, where they're just sort of loosely coupled, then that is a concern. And you do need to make sure that you give it a little bit of a, like I said, a friction fit or, some sort of reinforcement. Those little screw-on tabs would do a good job. Just something to keep it from getting, because it will get bumped quite a bit by firewood. And you do not want it to, to fall over. So for the most part, though, no, that isn't a concern when it is all one piece. And that does bring us, though, to an important thing that I've said over and over, but I want to reiterate. That secondary air piece has a second function that's just as important, in my opinion, as delivering the secondary air, and that's just keeping the firewood out of the back of the firebox, because the back of the firebox is where all of our mixing goes on. We really have our mixing chamber kind of in between the secondary air and before the port. We're trying to mix our fuel and our air, and we're stuffing them through the port. And so it's important that you don't get chunks of wood back in there, because they will really mess up the efficiency. That's something that Peter Vandenberg often talked about when in his early testing days, was a piece of firewood went back in front of the port, and my results were completely destroyed. So really important role of that secondary air piece is to act as andirons, as they are called in a fireplace, to hold the firewood in the proper location. So when you're this is I get the question a lot. Hey, if secondary air, is melting when it's metal, why don't we build that as ceramic or ceramic fiberboard or tile? I get those questions a lot as well, and that's what the reason why not is, because it needs to be the protection for the rest of the fragile firebox, as it were. So hope that sheds some light on all that. Hey, Short Bus Life, nice to see you. Welcome. Glad to have a Scotsman here. Welcome. So that's secondary air. That's the construction of those pieces. Dan in Australia sent me an interesting link to some high temp alloy that he's, I think, going to try out. I'm not sure, Dan, if you are or not. You didn't ever. I don't know if you are going to purchase it. And I apologize, I wasn't able to give you a better comparison to the RA330. I don't know much about metal and chemistry, a little. I know that it has something to do with nickel content, the 330 number. But beyond that, I don't know, and I wasn't really clear on how to compare your two alloys. But at any rate, where I'm trying to go with this is hopefully we'll be starting to get some other people identifying similar materials with similar properties that are available in other parts of the world. Because I know, for instance, Pete in Belgium wasn't able to get RA330. And so I think that if we can, start to network together, we should be able to find comparable materials. I would assume that there's comparable materials available everywhere in the world. So anyways, that's really helpful, Dan. Thanks for that. And please do keep me posted on how that stuff works. So let's move on. I got another question. This is a really big topic, and I don't think we'll go very far into it, but it might open up some discussion with some of you. But for the most part, I just want to give you kind of the overview. And this question is, I don't have the email in front of me, but I got a wonderful email from a very nice gentleman this week asking about permitting, rocket stoves, permitting, and code. And as you all know, this is a huge topic. There's a lot to cover. And not only that, it's a huge issue in the minds of most builders. It's something that most folks who are considering building a rocket mass heater really would love some clear answers on permitting and code and legality and rocket mass heaters. And so I get that question a lot. Hey Kenneth, welcome. Welcome. So it's a common question, and unfortunately it's not one that has any definitive answer that is applicable to the masses, as it were. And what I mean to say by that is, unfortunately, every individual is going to have to research what the legality is in their own municipality. And the reason for that is because these laws vary from state to state, county to county, and in some cases city to city. And so there isn't any underlying, this gentleman's question was so kind, and I felt so bad because there was nothing I could do other than just say, it's really up to where you are, and you have to research the specifics. And once you know the specifics, you can get back to me and we can identify, what our challenges are. But unfortunately, there is no underlying, here's a general guideline of how you're going to get through your codes or your legality with a rocket mass heater, because the laws vary so much from place to place to place. So let me catch up with chat, and then I will come back and we can go deeper into that. So Short Bus Life says, I'm currently building a kind of RMH that runs on chicken manure for heating water to then heat chicken sheds. That is awesome. So are you burning the chicken manure to heat the water? Because that's really, really cool. So if you have enough chicken manure, I was thinking you could maybe just do a giant passive pile with a black coil of poly tubing underneath. You can heat the water at least above freezing. Pretty hot actually with a big manure pile, but you'd need a really big one. But burning chicken manure is pretty cool too. So Cletus asks, if one were to have a minimal brick surround containing an 8-inch core that then fed a 2-barrel radiator that had at least a 15-foot 8-inch chimney flue, would success be reasonably expected? Well, Cletus, I think that there's a lot of open-endedness there in terms of what is success? What do you expect? What's reasonable? But in general, yeah, it'll work. I think, I think it'd be good. I think you'd probably have times when there was a lot of heat left in the exhaust. Those 2 barrels probably wouldn't be able to pull all the heat out of it, and so you might be running at sort of box stove efficiency, which isn't terrible. But I think it would work really well. Rocket mass heaters without mass, I just feel like there's better ways to achieve quick, or to achieve wood burning heat for dwellings, mostly because of the time factor. The rocket mass heater, Cletus, without mass like you're proposing will be wonderful, but as soon as it's not burning, it will have no heat, and when it's burning, it's going to be just putting out its max potential. That might work for you, and if it does, then it would be great, But if you're trying to use that to heat something overnight and you want to sleep, it won't be very good. If it's just in your shop and you just want to go down for a couple hours, fire up the heater and hang out near it, it's probably fine. But just want you to understand that. I get a lot of questions along those lines of just full radiator setups on rocket mass heaters, and I'm always sort of want to caution people because there's no, you can't turn them down and let them go for a long time. So especially people in really small spaces, that's the one we get a lot, right? We've covered it, so I won't go too far into it. But tiny homes or vans or RVs, if you have wood-fired heat, you really need to figure out some way to extend its heating cycle, because otherwise you're just going to be super hot and then cold, It's just such a short, quick, intense cycle. So there's that. So Short Bus Life says, this is the second RMH I built. The first one was in a bus. Oddly enough, there we are talking about it. And yes, chicken manure is burnt and burns well enough that we melted a stainless steel basket, so needed to redesign the catcher. Wow, super cool, man. We have 4 200-meter long chicken sheds, around 100,000 chickens. Well, I'll tell you, dang, you got a lot of chicken manure to work with. That's really cool. So I love the rocket mass heater idea, the approach to burning it. But it sounds like you have enough. If you haven't thought about it, depends on how much heat you have, but you might be able to just do some compost pile heating systems that provide you with, they won't make real hot water, but they'll make like 100-degree Fahrenheit, so whatever that is, 33 or 35 Celsius, something like that. I think, I'm just guessing. You guys can correct me. Water just with passive compost, the decomposition of your hot chicken manure, making heat in a big pile with a big water coil inside there. One way to do it, another way to do it. But the RMH sounds fun, and so you must have to dry the chicken manure, I would guess. The RMH is 9 feet long and 3 foot wide, riserless, with a steel plate covering the entire bell. Wow. Huh. That sounds really cool, man. That sounds awesome. All right. Well, I'm intrigued, to say the least. You're definitely doing some heavy duty recycling there and getting some heat out of something that that's awesome. Love it. So anyways, let's go back to permitting. So permitting, at least, and this isn't necessarily a specific conversation to the U.S., because I do actually think that this is a conversation that we can talk about internationally, in the sense that you're going to need to identify what your hurdles are. So let's talk about it just briefly. It's going to be hard to go into any specifics. So what I want to do is help people who might be in this predicament and they don't know what to do. And here I am saying, I don't know what to do. You do it yourself. That's not really what I'm saying. Here's what I want you to do is you need to first and foremost find out what rules you are governed by. So if you're in the States, you want to go to your state website and look up solid fuel heater, solid fuel burning regulations. If you're in a different country, you'll have to find your wherever the appropriate place is. Typically there's going to be environmental regulations from an agency, something like that. And then there might be some construction. So those are the state in my state, the state codes are the environmental ones, and then the municipal codes are the building codes, where you actually get into the nuts and bolts of whether you can build, how you can build certain things. So the first thing you need to do is check with your state and or federal government. Find out what your environmental laws are. Find out what your regulations are, what you're limited by. You might want to call local masons. They'll have a good idea of any masonry codes. They might not know about solid fuel burning, but they will know about bricks and stone and things like that, and how those can interface with the rest of your build. And again, these are all things that are local. So you really need to pay attention to those. And then, really what I want to say is just things you might run into. So I know one state where the only legal masonry solid fuel burners are ones that have a production combustion core that has been tested and certified by an EPA certified lab. So in other words, I or some other rocket mass heater manufacturer, Dragon Heaters, somebody like that, would need to not only produce a core for sale, but we would need to take that to an EPA certified lab, get the appropriate testing, send that to the EPA, get the appropriate certifications, and then sell that core as a certified core. And so that is the only acceptable masonry heater installation in particular state that I'm thinking of. So in other words, if you write me and say, what's it going to take I want to build a 6-inch J, I want to build it to code, what's it going to take? And I'm, if you live in that state, I'm going to tell you it's flat out impossible. You will never, ever build one legally. That's just the way it is. Now, there's other states where the code simply states box stoves must have this efficiency and be rated from the EPA, and masonry heaters are exempt. Boom, you're done. You can just go ahead and build yourself your rocket mass heater. There might be some other codes as you go farther down into your municipal codes that limit the weight or, the materials or the location of that masonry heater. But in your state, in terms of legality, you get to bypass the EPA wood stove stuff. You get to bypass EPA solid fuel stuff. It's a masonry heater by any description. You're good to go. So those are kind of the two opposite ends of the spectrum. And, there's everything in between with all different layers of regulation. And that exists everywhere. I know from my international dealings that there's places in Europe where they have similar type of restrictions as my most restrictive example. A masonry heater must have a tested and certified core. And there's other places where there are no such restrictions. So unfortunately, I really wish I could just give you guys, well, if you're going to be in code, it's got to be like this. There is unfortunately not any single blanket path or practice that will get you any closer to being able to install one legally, unless that path is moving. So, that's pretty much it with the legality and the code stuff. Is you're just going to have to dig into your local system. And, I'm always happy to help. Once you run into those things, sometimes, the code might say something like, masonry heater, okay, must have spark arrest and fire grate, or you'll have certain stipulations, and those are things we can overcome. So we just need to know what they are. So there you go. So I'm going to catch back up to chat here. So Cletus says, I do mean a proper bell, just undersized. The idea is to push heat downhill. A minimal brick surround. Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. Sounds like the system would draw and then I could tune the barrels for more heat storage. Yeah, Cletus, yes, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. Yeah, as long as you're okay with tuning it, it absolutely. I mean, it's a great way to start. Don't get me wrong. That's an awesome, yes. I think you'd have a really reasonable chance of success doing exactly what you say. And, what you'll find... So what you'll find with those big radiators, a radiator-only system with no brick in a bell, is that every time you struggle to start up. And those two barrels will pull a lot of the initial startup heat out of the exhaust, so they can be finicky to start. And so you'll struggle with that each time if you don't have much. But if you have a little brick bell, that helps a lot, because it can, you can get some heat entrained in there that can help you with the subsequent startups. I'm just stumbling over my words here. But yeah, I think it's going to work fine. And as long as you're willing to play with it and tune it, I think it's going to be it could be great for you. It's just be prepared to tune it. So I think it would draw. You just have to work through the first start a little, but you'll get there. So, okay. All right. Well, that's got us all caught up. So I have a photo I really want to share with you guys. It's something that I think is just so cool. And please keep the questions coming, you guys. If you have more on that stuff I was talking about, I'm happy to go over them. But I want to share this awesome build with you, and it's only a single photo, but it is so cool, and let's take a look at it now. So let's see. Can I get? Well, I can just move it all around, I guess. I can try and get myself out of the way here. Yeah. Okay. So I love this, and I really wanted to share it with you because, one of the most common questions I get from people is agonizing over materials, and often I'll get folks from people who say, I really want to buy your plans, I really want to build a stove, but how much is it going to cost if I buy all that stuff? Is there any way to do it, kind of like a traditional rocket mass heater with just stuff we have here around the property, and stuff like that. So this is a friend of mine's build, and he is building this in what I believe is a straw bale home that he's built. But I just wanted to share this because I just think it's so fantastic and so resourceful. So he's building a basic riserless cord cook stove. He's got wonderful insulated fire brick for the core. And I love the insulated fire brick. They're expensive if you buy them new, but I love them because you can find them in old kilns. You can often find them like behind an old pottery barn or something. And it's usually possible to salvage some for fairly inexpensively. And as you can see, this entire stove basically consists of insulated fire brick and then mud. And so I just love the resourcefulness here. So insulated fire brick means he's going to have a phenomenally high performance core. It's going to burn super hot. But then he just went around that, skinned it with some cob, a thin skin, just to kind of glue everything together. And now, as you can see, the whole stove body here, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. I don't think you can, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Over on the left side, around the core, you can see they're using adobes, so handmade clay brick, mud brick, to form the oven section, and starting to layer up adobes around the core as well to form the body of the stove. So all he is going to need is a piece of glass or cast iron for a top. And there will be a little bit of, it'll be a little bit of a trick to figure out how to top this whole thing. He'll need some glass or metal, like I just said, to cover both sides. But really what we're going to have is a core here, cooktop on top of this, and then this exhaust is going over into this oven area. You can see it's got like a sand floor, and that oven will have just a lovely little roasting oven. And this thing has just a ton of mass in it, and it's just so simple. That's it. I just love it. I just wanted to show you guys that. We haven't looked at many all natural builds here. Most of them are using the brick, and so I wanted to just share that it is entirely possible to just put a core up with bricks and everything else for the most part cob and build yourself a gorgeous heater. So hopefully I'll get some more photos of that along the way, and we can follow along with that build. I'm really looking forward to seeing it done. So there's that, and thank you, my friend, who sent that along. No metadata visible. I don't think. So there you go. So let's see. Let me catch up with chat here. Pablo, nice to see you. How are you? Pablo says, I found a supplier locally that has both ceramic fiberboard and castable refractory rated at 3,000 degrees. Are there plus and minus on either? Yes, Pablo, there definitely are pros and cons to both. I prefer the ceramic fiberboard. I've definitely experimented a lot with both, and that is my choice. The ceramic fiberboard offers higher performance burn because it's more insulative. I think it offers better longevity in terms of thermal wear. Refractory, when you start getting into bigger pieces, it's really likely that you will develop cracks due to thermal shock. Even though it's refractory, we just have big thermal changes across like if it's in the core and it's the roof, let's say, like this part gets super hot really quick while this part's really cold, that just tends to crack refractory slabs of any description. So I feel like hard cast refractory has a much higher chance of cracking and potentially needing to be replaced, within the decade, whereas ceramic fiberboard, you won't have any of those issues, but what you might have is abrasion wear. And I just put, anywhere where there's a chance of abrasion wear, which is just the firebox, I either accept that I'm going to replace those or I protect it. So I feel like the ceramic fiberboard is my preference. I also feel like castable refractory is a giant pain, and it's typically just it's so much work to form your molds and do your castings and cure it right and hope it doesn't crack, and it was expensive. The dust is really dangerous. People talk about ceramic fiber being dangerous to your lungs. Castable refractory is just as bad, if not worse. It's already powder. So there's a whole lot of reasons that I have gone away from castable refractory, and I'm not trying to put it in a negative light, because it is, I would put ceramic fiberboard and castable refractory sort of on, equal sort of pedestals on both sides, depending on what your choice is in terms of building styles. So ceramic fiberboard, super easy to build with, right? You just cut it into the boards. Castable refractory, you got to build a mold, you got to mix it, you got to pour it, you got to cure it or dry it, then cure it, which if you read none of us cure it, right? We're supposed to have kilns where we keep it for like 2 days at 1300 degrees. Most of us just stick it in the firebox and call it a day, because we can't cure it the way it's intended to. So there's just a whole lot of reasons I think castable refractory is, don't get me wrong, it was my number one choice until ceramic fiberboard came along. And it absolutely works. And in some places, I would argue it's the superior choice. There are places like maybe the firebox sides, it might be just great to cast those out of refractory slabs and not have to worry about ceramic fiber abrasion. But again, it's really up to you in terms of what you're willing to do for work, what you're willing to do for, cost, time, durability. There's just a whole host of questions. And I would definitely say that castable refractory is not more durable than ceramic fiberboard. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings that we get when people look at ceramic fiberboard. They will often say, I'm going to choose fire bricks because they're more durable, or I'm going to choose castable refractory because it's more durable. And I strongly believe the opposite. I think ceramic fiberboard, while it's fragile to abrasion wear, it's much more durable to thermal shock than either of those dense materials. And as we saw from, I think it was, did we look at it? It's a post on Donkey's board, the fellow rebuilding his fire brick Jay. All of his top fire bricks were completely blown apart after 7 years of burning. So hard fire bricks and cast refractory are in no means and should never be considered a permanent part of a build. They will need replacing because they will crack. So that's my opinion in terms of what I prefer. I prefer the ceramic fiberboard. I would much rather deal with a little bit of softness and abrasion wear than casting the work of building the molds. It's just a lot of work. You're just building wooden boxes, it's just a pain. So anyways, I sound pretty negative on castable refractory because after building so many stoves, if I'm looking at building a J-tube, it's the difference of getting a board of ceramic fiberboard and cutting it with a knife and stacking up my core, or going out to the shop and literally spending probably a few days building molds and casting. So there's a huge difference in the input you put into getting from raw materials to burning a core. Ceramic fiberboard, it's like an hour. Castable refractory, it's like a week, 40 hours of work. And so to put in that much work, I'm hoping I'm going to get a huge benefit, and I just don't see it. So, if they were equal amount of work, if I could cut out of her, if I could go buy a castable refractory and just cut my slabs, and it'd be a much closer toss-up. So there's that. There's that. So Cletus says, "Awesome build. Love seeing these." Thank you, Cletus. I'm really hoping that some of you appreciated that. I know that it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but to me, that's like one of the most exciting builds in my stable, because he's doing it with just almost no monetary input, and he doesn't have to drive anywhere and get stuff. I mean, he's just puttering around the property, and he's able to build a beautiful cook stove. And I find that really inspiring, and I just hope that more people are aware that that's possible. I just want people to know that that's possible, that we haven't moved so far away from the hippie mud stoves, that side of it still exists, as well as the soapstone, $10,000 gorgeous stoves that are totally at home in a really fine home. So I just want to illustrate that. So I'm glad you appreciate it, Cletus. Thank you. So David Swanson, David, thank you for being here. David's got great experience, you guys. And David says, I've done both CFB and castable in a riserless core. And David Swanson says, castable refractory is very difficult to drill or cut. Building my castable molds and pouring just took an afternoon. Okay, so David, you did much better than I did then. you must have good mold building skills. I just go slow when I'm cutting plywood. I don't have a lot of scraps around. I got to get a sheet out and mark out all, if you're talking about 6 sides of a box, you've got to make 6 molds, and each mold has 5 sides, right? Because it's an open topped mold, so you're talking about 30 boards that you've cut and screwed together. It just takes a lot of time and work. But yeah, maybe my 40 hours was a little excessive. I should show you at some point. I'll go back into my I have so many photos of so many of my old builds, and so many of those were cast. Excuse me. And I have some really interesting batch boxes with really interesting cast turbulence inducers and cast secondary air spin, vortex inducers and riser vortex inducers. I was, like most of us, when we get into this thing, we really grasp onto all the concepts and we take them all kind of to the extremes, and then you sort of come back and go, okay, these simple designs are really what are working. But I've been far down that road. It's one of the reasons why I'm always able to be like, no, step away from the ledge, because I'm that kind of crazy person. I love doing that stuff. So I'd love to show you some of my older builds, because they show a lot of that casting. Casting was a huge, part of it was my main tool for prototyping for a long time. And it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I mean, especially for any kind of prototyping. Now, if we're building final stoves, we know it's our last one, then like I said, there's some compromises there that you can decide on. But as David says, CFB is the way to go. So David Swanson says 4 molds of your riser list: left and right of the firebox, left and right of the batch box. Yeah. Oh, okay, you did them in just halves. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So, and the problem is as you get those molds bigger, and David, I'll be curious to hear your response, and I know that you're quite skilled with all of these material things, and so I do expect that, I do have the pictures. I actually have a folder with your name on it, David, and I'll get into them. Thanks for calling me out. I do save them all, by the way. They're not just lost. It's just, I get so many, it's hard to keep up with all of them. But what I want to say is, David, if you are splitting those cores into basically halves, and this is not a pick on you, David, you're doing great. I just want to say that as those core pieces get bigger, you just get more chance of them, breaking due to thermal shock, because you have bigger differences in temperature across the whole piece. In other words, if you make your core out of like 12 little segments, they're probably less likely to crack. But if it's made out of 2 segments, you're going to have 1200 degrees at one end and 70 at the other at one point in the burn. And that's really difficult for materials to handle. So David says, line the CFB batch box with thin fire brick for a brazing replacement, and boom. I mean, hopefully what you guys are seeing is that this is a progression. And we've just talked our way through the progression that I went through, and David now has gone through. And David, if I may, I'd like to just share I don't remember how long ago you first emailed me, but I think it's at least a year, and maybe it was 2 years. But I want to share our first conversation that David and I had, because I remember, because I get a lot of emails from a lot of people wanting to build stoves, and typically we're starting with them kind of coming into it at the beginning of that path that we just illustrated, and me, being where I am now. And so David comes to me and says, I want to build. Now, I don't remember exactly how it went down, but basically he was asking about CFB versus refractory. And I think at the time, if I'm not mistaken, he said, I'm pretty sure I want to use castable refractory. This is how you do this stuff. And David's a really knowledgeable guy with materials. So, he knew that that's how you build wood-burning solid fuel things, is with castable refractory. So he said, this is what I want to do. And I said, well, that's good, but I prefer CFB, and here's why. And I think that and we went back and forth, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time, but I said, I think that, what you'll find, excuse me, you guys, let me just take care of that real quick. I said, I think that what you'll find is that the CFB just offers, so much ease of use and high performance that, well, it's my preference, but, you should check it out for yourself. And David was so cool. He goes, I'm going to build one of each. And David, you're the only person who's ever said that. And if you remember correctly, I was just like, I was blown away, and I was ecstatic, because I was like, man, this guy is going to have the same experience I had. Or at least, I don't mean he's going to make the same opinion, but he's going to get to experience it and see for himself, and somehow our conversation was like that. I was like, you should just check it out and evaluate it, because I think that you'll find the CFB is your preference, but I don't really know, and I'd love to hear your take. And so here we are 2 years later, and that was it. I think David just said it right there. CFB is the way to go. That's kind of that culmination of that story. It just happened like a few minutes ago. And that isn't to say that the refractory models are bad. Like, I don't think David's here going, they're garbage. I would never do it again. They failed. It doesn't sound like they did. It's just the CFB just works, and it's easy. And if you go down that whole path, you come to, at least I came to the point of view that a little abrasion wear is something I can deal with, and I can also protect the areas where there's abrasion wear fairly simply by just lining with Firebrick splits, or in my case the RA330 liner, and we're up and running, and there's no more issue with the abrasion wear. So that's CFB versus refractory. Now, I do want to say there is some CFB. Just try moving a castable riserless core, says David. And I think that we did talk about that in the beginning, and that's one of the biggest things. The moving part is kind of is fun, and it's humor, but it illustrates a really important point, and that is that's how much mass you have to heat up in the core before you start to really get to full temperature, before you start to get to full efficiency, and before you start to really blow that heat downstream and start to heat the things you wanted to heat in the first place. So that's why a CFB core is so high performance and so efficient, and why it's such my preference, because you instantly are sending that heat downstream into what you were trying to heat originally. Whereas if you have 250 pounds of castable refractory in your core, you've got a lot of mass to heat up before you really are sending the full power downstream. So there's that. It's just an anecdote about that stuff, but I think you guys know I've been on the CFB high horse for a while. I've been pushing it for years now, and it's not been easy, right? There's been a lot of pushback along the way, and still we get some. And so this has been my goal, is just to get enough people out there who have experienced it, that other people can make their own opinions based on, that it's not just me saying I like it better, that other people go, yeah, you know what, I like it better too. It does wear from abrasion, whatever all these, whatever the pros and cons are, but I do prefer it. And so with that said, I just want to go back really quick. I did get an email from somebody, and I think he posted on Donkey's board, although it might have been Permies, I don't remember. But he had really soft, crappy ceramic fiberboard. And I think it was Vortex who said my fiberboard was like that too. And Vortex often talks about how the fiberboard, his experience was that it was terrible material. And I think that those guys, I have gotten board like that before. It was like one of the first boards I bought. But if you buy the cheapest board, and I wish I could identify who the supplier was, I haven't figured out how to avoid the bad stuff yet. I've only gotten it once in 10 years, and I've rarely seen it. Apparently Vortex got it in Wales or Scotland or wherever he is. But at any rate, there is some ceramic fiberboard out there that if you buy the cheapest and the lowest temperature, it's like fluffy and it just like falls apart. That isn't what we're looking for. Most of the ceramic fiberboard will knock like a board, like it's firm. So do be aware that it is possible to hear from someone who said, "Oh, that stuff sucks," or "I got some and it was like a cotton ball." There are some different products out there apparently, and as we go down this road, hopefully we'll get some better insight into how to identify which ones those are. He did email me and say, "Does this stuff look right?" He goes, "It's the cheapest I could find," and the temperature rating was the same as all my other temperature ratings. So I said, "Yeah, it looks right," but then he emailed me a few weeks later and said, "Man, I tested it and it's really weird, soft." So there you go. Don't buy the cheapest. But that's it. So Short Bus Life says, only reason I didn't go with CFB is due to cost for prototype unit, and Aircrete is cheap and very insulative. Yeah, Short Bus, by all means, don't let my speeches about materials deter you from experimentation. So that's one of the things I also want to just make sure I reiterate. I have made so many experiments out of horrible materials. I've done Portland-based backyard foundry type cores, basically concrete and perlite. Terrible. I would never recommend it to anyone, but I learned a lot by doing it, and I was able to get through some prototypes and learn more about my craft. So when I talk up or down about different materials, that isn't to say you should never do this, unless I say you should never do this because it's dangerous. But absolutely, man, I think that sometimes prototyping with what you have on hand, well, just like the cook stove I showed you, he just has mud, so that's what he's building out of. So I think that's great. Yeah, Short Bus Life. These blocks are called Thermalite in the UK. I think you're talking about the lightweight, fire brick, maybe. I don't know. Anyways, so that's an hour, you guys. I think that's enough for today. We definitely got through the topics I wanted to talk about. Mainly permitting and secondary air were the things I really wanted to go over, and I also wanted to show you the awesome mud cook stove. So I think that's enough for today. Let's get together next Wednesday and do this again. So I can't thank you guys enough. Thank you guys so much for all your comments and questions and your photos. Please send me your photos. Send me your build questions. Let me help you build the stove that you want. As you guys know, my website, walkerstoves.com, I got cook stove and rocket stove plans for sale. And if you buy plans, I'm always here to consult with. It's part of the deal. Part of the cost of the plans is you can get a hold of me and we can help you build your best stove. So there you go. So David's comment here says, Matt's plans uses 1-inch thick CFB and 2 layers. I used only one 1-inch layer with a steel corner frame. Batch box is lined with 1/2-inch thick fire brick. Full winter with multiple burns daily and ready to go again. So that's great input, David. Thank you for that as always. And everybody, just thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much for your support. I couldn't do this without you, and I'm really having a great time hanging out with everybody every week. So let's do it again next Wednesday. Think of some questions. Send me some photos. I got some more builds to look at. And I hope you guys have an awesome week. So, all right, you guys, I'm going to hit the outgoing video. And we'll see you next week. Have an awesome week.